Another big reason for patients to lose their jobs, not be able to work, is fatigue. Is this a mitochondrial problem that they're getting? And as I mentioned earlier, we undertook a small study that looked at optic neuritis patients with an old medication called ACTH, corticotropin, that has some properties in addition to steroids, and often can be helpful for patients who are intolerant of steroids. And it's not as what we call immunosuppressive as steroids. And we looked at acute optic neuritis patients. It was a study of 24. They were treated with this rather than IV steroids. And the goal of the study was to see, did they get a little better with their vision? And optical coherence tomography scans were done to see if there was any preservation of the retinal ganglion cells or the axons. That was our primary outcome. The medication failed there. It didn't preserve those structures. But to our surprise, and we know it's correct because we didn't expect this at all, the opposite eye improved in low contrast. And the patients told us this. These were eyes that never had optic neuritis. And this brings up this whole issue now of we can really do a good job, an excellent job at stopping attacks, but we have to start getting into the area of repair and neuroregeneration. So Rob, what do you think about this? Would you ever start testing low contrast and cognitive function on your optic neuritis patients?
Well, low contrast is very simply done just by altering, like I said, with a computer chart. The thing is that when you're measuring contrast sensitivity, you have to be careful because you have to have the ophthalmic background, because there are many things that affect contrast sensitivity, anything from a cataract to even impaired deep, astigmatism, a bad refraction. So let's put all those things aside and say we can do it. That's something that's readily doable. I haven't considered the cognitive part yet in my patients. As you said, they tend to be young. We think they tend to be doing well, but maybe that's just something we've been overlooking. I'd really like to add, and I know that you are a big advocate of structural measures in the retina and in the optic nerve at looking at patients with optic neuritis. And this has also been a game changer. When I was in training, OCT, optical coherence tomography, was just becoming widely used in the clinic. It had been used on a research basis for probably 10 years before that. But what it's showing us now is basically in vivo, the structure of the ganglion cells, the structure of the retina, and what we know is not only patients with optic neuritis, but patients with degenerative disease in general, and I think MS now clearly falls into that category, show decreased measures over time. So this tool has become instrumental in not only the clinic, but in research studies, even as a primary outcome measure for studies on optic neuritis, in looking at changes over time in retinal thickness. And I think in the study that you're talking about with ACTH, that was one of the concerns, and one of the interesting findings was a change, maybe you can describe for us, of the structural parameters that we saw in the retina after treatment.
Well, we saw some, increase there in the ganglion cell thickness. And what was interesting is that it didn't matter what the axons were doing. The axons disappear no matter what. And is there something there that we get rid of these bad axons? Could something else come along to create repair? It's a very complex issue, but one that patients want and is completely where our field needs to go. Getting back to the OCT stuff, we found this to be extraordinarily important in finding NMO versus MS. The central retinal artery with multicolor OCT, that is a very special type of OCT, will show that that artery turns green, meaning it's ischemic. And this makes perfect sense because that's what happens in the spinal cord. And these patients don't get better because it proceeds to a central retinal artery occlusion. This is a vasculitis. So that's key. We can also find rare diseases like Susac syndrome this way and a couple other things that can mimic MS, even for the best neuro-ophthalmologists. So we have to keep doing this.